Hey, what's up, Canada and beyond? Welcome to what's going to be an incredibly inspiring, educational show tonight. First things first, though, before we get into our amazing guest, a little bit of housekeeping. And some updates and some news on Thursday. First things first, and try to do this in chronological order for you guys. On Thursday, we have Lanny the lawyer and Doris Reimer coming on. This is kind of seems to be a Justice Week theme going on here at What's Up Canada and beyond. So there's going to be a lot to learn over the next week. So like, subscribe, and share first and foremost, guys. We do this together. So on Thursday, 6 o'clock Central, we've got Lanny and Doris. That is going to be a story that you guys are going to want to catch up on, and we'll obviously get an update on Stacy's happy place. On Saturday, we've got a Patriot Switch hangout, or pardon me, Sunday at 3 o'clock Central Time. If you guys want to come and hang out with us and learn a bit more about what hundreds of us are doing to not only defund the cabal, but set up some pretty nice side hustles along the way too. So that's Sunday. Hit me up with a private message or an email or something, and I'll make sure you guys get a link to that. And then next week, we're going to be starting something on a bi-monthly basis. So it's like twice a month. Where Bryce Wade from our Gold and Silver guys is going to come on, and we're going to do money talks, real world style. You guys know that he is very much in the truth space and seeking financial solutions for all of us. This is why we work together. But he has agreed to start doing a show a couple of times a week where we can get into the nitty gritty, and you guys can talk to him one-on-one and get your questions answered and get solutions to protect you from bank bail-ins and all of the insanity going on out there. So now, without further ado, it's my humble pleasure to have Mr. Leighton Grey joining us here tonight. Thank you, Leighton, for finding some time to join us. And this is going to be a roller coaster ride. You're a very well-known public figure out there already in the last couple of years. So first and foremost, thank you for all that you do. And again, for finding some time to join us here. And if you don't know who Leighton is, you're probably pretty fresh to the resistance of whatever you want to call it that seems to be permeating our country. So thanks, Leighton, for joining us.
Well, I'm honored to be here. And I want to say, Wayne, I just love your intro. That video and that music just made me want to get in a truck and drive to Ottawa. It's like a Super Bowl commercial. So whoever did that for you, that bravo, that's really well done.
Well, that typically I would update my intros and stuff, once or twice a year. But when a friend of mine and I put that together, it was a very emotional time for us, and we wanted it to resonate through that. So it stuck around. So Derek helped me out with that a couple of years ago, and it makes my chair squirm every time I start a show. So to me, it's the right way to open up the discussion and set the tone. So thanks for noticing that. We get a lot of compliments on that. So I hope Derek is watching and he can smile a little bit too. So
yeah, we have some great production people on my show, the Gray Matter podcast, and it's a big job making me look and sound good. So I have a great appreciation for the production people behind the scenes who are, no offense, Wayne, they're the real stars of the show.
Well, it's been an evolution. I'm pretty much a one-man show here these days. I have been for a long time. Obviously there's a lot of collaboration and cooperation that goes on in this space because we actually have a new media environment. You're a part of it. 5 years ago, I'm pretty sure if I'd asked you then if you would see yourself being a podcaster in the resistance in Canada, you would have laughed and said, sorry, you're a kook. I'm out of here.
I got a very nice compliment recently from a fellow podcaster you probably know named Drew Weatherhead. Is a great podcast called the Social Disorder Podcast. He's also an author. He called me the Jordan Peterson of lawyers, and I don't think I could get a higher compliment. So but that was very, very nice, especially to get that from somebody else who's in the podcasting space.
Well, we live in a time where just doing things that to some of us seem normal seem incredibly courageous for others, and we tend to develop these emotional connections to people because they represent people that do those things, that are brave enough to go out there and have the conversations and to fight the fights. And Jordan
Yeah.
Peterson is an internationally renowned person doing it. Whether you like him or agree with him, he's one of those people that goes where the conversations need to happen. And
Yeah.
that's in essence very much what you do. So I
Mhm.
kind of like to ask you a little bit about that. And this is
Sure.
going to be a jam-packed hour. What inspired you to move from the courtroom to the studio room?
Well, it probably won't surprise people who follow you and listen to you that it started for me in the COVID-19 pandemic. Before then, I was going along nicely, had a very flourishing law practice, very blessed to work with some incredible lawyers and people. But I experienced COVID-19 in my own way. And what I experienced was I was one of the ones who early on, and you can go back and you can see some of the stuff I was posting online for proof. But I early on, I just knew something was really dreadfully wrong. I never bought into, 15 days to flatten the curve or any of that stuff. And I started writing early on, and some of the things I was writing got me into trouble. I said, for example, I came out and I said that I thought that George Soros was going to influence the 2020 presidential election, which he did. I said that I thought that BLM was a leftist front that was being financed by international NGOs, and it is. It turns out BLM actually stands for Big Luxury Mansions. But the thing that got me into real trouble was I saw the Trudeau government monkeying around with the Emergencies Act early in 2020, and I predicted that they would use the COVID-19 pandemic as an excuse to invoke it, and they did. And so what happened was that triggered a cancel culture attack upon me. Um, it was led by by the NDP, by the Alberta NDP and the CBC, Trudeau's private henchman, Mr. Farber, if you know who that is.
Yes.
Yeah, he called me a latent anti-Semite. I'm not quite sure what that is. As a Christian, of course, I have a rather strong love for Jews, since our Savior was obviously born one. But that caused me to have to. I was pressured by the Kenney government in Alberta at the time. This is in 2020, the spring of 2020, to resign from a board that was to select judicial candidates. And I made an online pledge at the time on a social media platform saying that I would not select judges on the basis of diversity, inclusion, equity, which I call DIE. I borrowed that from Dr. Peterson. That I was going to pick the best people, regardless of their immutable characteristics. And the reason why I said that is because I thought at the time, and I still say, that if we're going to invest these people with such incredible power to decide people's lives, to actually change the culture of our country, as we saw unfold during COVID, there's no way that we can do anything but pick the very best people, regardless of whether they're women or people of color or space aliens or whatever. We just have to have the best people in that role, and that's not just true of judges, as you know, Wayne. That's true of airline pilots. We're hearing a lot about that. That's true of politicians. That's true of media people. That's true of plumbers. I mean, we have to have the best people in these jobs to have a functioning society. But that effectively got me removed from that board, and then that set me on a journey where I started writing, and I was invited by the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms and John Carpe to be lead counsel on some very important cases in Alberta. I had the honor to represent two courageous pastors, men of God, James Coates and Timothy Stevens, and they were pastors who were jailed over COVID lockdowns. And I also got to be lead counsel along with my good friend Jeffrey Rath on what Viva Frei just described as the most important civil decision of the 21st century in Canada, which is the Ingram case, in which ultimately we were successful in having all of the lockdown orders that were imposed in Alberta throughout the pandemic declared illegal and invalid. So since then, that just set me on a different course. And essentially, I've become almost exclusively working in this space on behalf of people impacted by COVID, people who are impacted by violation of their human rights. And I've sort of become very, very focused on class actions, which I can talk about in more detail if you like. The other big thing that happened quite by accident is because I was working on some of these interesting cases, I was invited to start talking to the media, and I was encouraged by some of the people that I appeared in front of on their shows. They said, you have a lot of interesting things to say. You should think about developing your own podcast. So I did. And this has been one of the greatest journeys of my life. We're now well over 200 episodes. I've met so many, and I know you can relate to this, Wayne. There's so many just fascinating people, and everyone you talk to really enriches your life. It grows your mind. And it is the greatest learning experience. And I spent 8 years at the university, and more than that in postgraduate study. But really, doing the podcast has been the greatest learning experience of my life. It's been so enriching, and actually, it's invigorated my approach to my law practice, and I think has really improved my lawyering because it's expanded my mind. It's made me so much more appreciative of other disciplines. And you just learn so much from reading people's books and talking with them, and things of that nature. So that's kind of been my origin story. And so here I am, and here I go. And now I have the pleasure of being on What's Up Canada and speaking with you.
Well, it's there's a lot in there and I don't want to keep you here for 4 hours because I could. But it's interesting because those things that make this so rewarding are exactly what will be lost if we continue down this path of this DEI, this die concept. And that was so far, my biggest brush with American media was when I came out in 2021 on Newsmax explaining what DEI was and literally naming the names of who was implementing this. And a few weeks later, Tucker was talking about it, and Glenn Beck was talking about it. So never underestimate what you learn from people in these spaces, and these are the things that we have to keep fighting for. So I'm very proud to have you in this space, and that's actually one of the reasons why I was eager to get you on a show, is because so many of these people that have these professions that are all impacted tend to stay in their lane and not have discussions outside of whatever it is that's afflicting or affecting them. But you've done that, and a couple hundred episodes later, as you said, you've gotten such broader context for all of the fights and all of the battles, and you've been a profound leader in articulating some of those, and this is exactly what we need, because this is how we use the truth. The truth doesn't fear anybody or anything. So we combat this misinformation and disinformation by having broader spectrum discussions. And this is how we get to learn about those exceptional individuals. And that's what freedom to me is all about.
That's a great definition.
Well, that's how I sleep at night. I still am free, and I still have the opportunity to talk to exceptional individuals, and they can, hit me all they want. My thing is, when it comes to this fascism, is you hit like a girl, adapt, improvise, and overcome. You will not silence me. I am that stubborn of an individual. That's the only reason I exist in this space, was I thought, a rock could do better than what we were getting from people in this space. And we're going to come back to that in a little bit.
You rock, Wayne.
Well, sometimes I identify as a rock in some circles and discussions, because it's just I have to.
Well, you know, I'm a Christian, so rock has a very important significance for us in our faith. So I might call you Peter then.
Well, that is my last name, so
How about that? How about that?
right? So I guess I come by it naturally. Now you mentioned the big case, and this is
Mhm.
something, and I saw Leva's stream articulating that, and
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me if I'm wrong. That is kind of ultimately what paved the way or opened the doors for the class action case that's going on or just been launched in Alberta.
That's correct. Yes. I
Right.
don't have that case. I can talk about it a bit if you like.
Well, the reason that I wanted to connect these dots was not so much about that particular case, but as in that gate is open and
Yes.
others will be going through that. And
Yes.
that is a precedent, I believe, that impacts the entire nation, not
Hmm.
just Alberta.
I agree.
So that's the lens I guess I want to look at that
Sure.
from. A
Sure.
lot of the people that are in our community here are hearing from Jeff and Eva
Hmm.
and others involved in that as well, and we'll get their chance on here as well. So for
Good.
sure, tell us how kudos. I remember that case, and I remember winning when you went public with it with the result, and I was like, okay, well, this is big, but I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a
Mhm.
swamp donkey from northern Alberta. Simplify this for the rest of us, and then explain how this leads to more of what
Sure.
Jeff and those guys are doing.
Yeah. So if I could, it's important to go back to the beginning with that case, which goes back to the fall of 2020 when we're basically getting into the second wave of lockdowns, the ones that were more severe. If people will cast their minds back to that time, and I was approached, as I said, by the Justice Center. I was given the opportunity by John Carpe, for which I'll always be grateful, to be the lead counsel for the Justice Center on that case. Jeff was acting privately for a lady named Ingram, who's now gifted her name to the case. She was a gym owner who lost her business because of the lockdown restrictions, which shut her down, so she couldn't be open. But there were cases going on simultaneously in British Columbia, a case called Baudouin, a case in Manitoba called Gateway, and the Ingram case. And they were all sort of running along parallel lines. In each case, um, the Justice Center was involved in challenging the constitutionality of lockdowns because there was never any question that they violated certain aspects of the charter, especially, freedom of religious expression, freedom of expression, and of course the Section 7 right to life, liberty, and security of the person, freedom of association. Those types of things that are guaranteed under the charter, and these cases are running simultaneously. Of course, in BC, the BC government admitted the charter violations, but they were all saved under Section 1, which your viewers and listeners might know is the saving provision, which says that something that the government has done to violate charter rights and freedoms is justified it basically in the public good and the public interest. And in that case, and also in Manitoba, there was a similar ruling in the Gateway case, essentially saying that, we had to save the public from an existential health crisis, and more than that, to save the healthcare system. But in Alberta, we had a bit of a different scenario. We proceeded with the same charter argument, but we also ran a simultaneous argument, um, which the government lawyers did not pay much attention to, ultimately to their peril. It was a jurisdiction argument. Jurisdiction is basically the legal authority to make decisions. And what happened in Alberta is, of course, we have a law called the Public Health Act. And early on in the pandemic, Jason Kenney and his government had monkeyed around with it and really expanded the powers of the chief medical officer of health, who turned out to be Dr. Dina Hinshaw. In fact, she was granted the power that the actual wording was she could use any means necessary to fight the pandemic. That's really frightening language. That's the type of power that's given to princes and kings and emperors and popes.
And
And
tyrant.
yes, and tyrants. Very good. Thanks for finishing the sentence. um, and so that this was shocking. And so what happened was we also allege that the chief medical officer of health had exceeded her statutory authority in making these health orders. And so that argument, again, the government didn't pay much attention to it because they thought they had a sure winner. You know, they thought they had their secretariat because the BC case and the Manitoba case on the charter had already gone their way. And of course, nobody was winning anything against the government on COVID at the time. But what happened was we got the opportunity for the first time to cross-examine one of these chief medical officers of health under oath. And so we spent 3 or 4 days with Dr. Deanie Hinshaw. I did the bulk of the cross-examination of her. And I like to think that that resulted, at least contributed to her being fired, as she was. But in the end, what happened was it was revealed that Deanie Hinshaw was sort of a straw person, that she had been granted the authority to make all these decisions, to make all these orders. But under cross-examination, she revealed that, in fact, these were not her orders. They were her orders in name only. And that, in fact, she was getting her cues from the Kenney government, from Jason Kenney and his cabinet. And of course, this was not permitted under the Public Health Act. It defeated the entire purpose of handing over autocratic power to a government health bureaucrat. And so very reluctantly, Justice Romain of the Court of King's Bench found, and could not find otherwise, that every single health order in Alberta was ultra vires, or outside the authority of the Chief Medical Officer of Health, and therefore illegal. And this is unique and unprecedented in Alberta. That doesn't happen in any other province. And it's that that legal groundwork, legal basis, which laid the groundwork for the class action suit that Jeff has started, and that I understand Eva Chipiuk is assisting him with. And the importance of it is, even though Jason Kenney and gang had passed a statute or a section of the Public Health Act saying that no person could sue the government over a health order, the way that because we won on the jurisdictional argument, every single one of those health orders being declared illegal, it's as though they never existed, and therefore there's no exemption for the government. And so I have no doubt that this class action is going to succeed, and I think it's going to be an unprecedented moment for everyone, for all the plaintiffs involved. And I think it's going to influence sort of the course of the inquiry that we're going through in our country around COVID. And I'm talking in broader terms about the National Assistance Inquiry. And I think it's all leading us inexorably towards something that must happen. And that is, we must have a full-blown public inquiry in this country, with fully vested with the teeth and force of law, into the decisions that were made by government, why they did it, how they did it, who was influencing them, all of these things. I think the public just deserves and needs to know. I don't think we're going to be able to move past all of this until that happens. It's my opinion.
I 100% agree with you, to the nail on that. And there's a lot again in that is, see, I'm going to have to get you back. I can tell already.
Happy to do it anytime.
There's significant differences between class actions and misfeasance torts and accountability, and that's just like to take get you to take a minute on that.
Sure.
I get there's a lot of frustration out there, and this is something that I realized early on in 2020. This was going to happen. Frustration in the judiciary and in the system, because the wheels of justice move so much slower than the wheels of the real world around us. We eat, sleep, breathe, and we vibrate 24/7 against what's going on, and the courts only still work in their short window of time during the day. So I expected this to be coming. So there's a lot of frustration out there. Why isn't there accountability? Why aren't we going after the people that did all of this? And now we're at the position here now where this is actually the process of what we're starting to see. And this class action is one of those initiatives that is in the direction of accountability. And this is where the door is open in Alberta for a lot of different things. And I'm not sure, as you said that, because these things were dismissed in other provinces, precedents were set.
Hmm.
Health and these laws are basically under provincial jurisdiction. Does that mean a revisit to those cases, to those provinces, on those cases? Or is there other avenues to go into that?
Hmm.
And to start with, the difference between class action lawsuits and misfeasance torts when people are seeking justice, and how the doors are open towards those
Hmm.
kinds of things.
Well, with a class action, what you're essentially doing is you're launching an action that's in the name of someone called a representative plaintiff. So let's say it's Jane Doe versus the government of Alberta. So that person is a representative plaintiff. Their name goes on the lawsuit, and they'll be the person who's actively engaged in the case for the purposes of different stages of the litigation. But a class action is a case that is of broader public significance, and it involves what are called common issues, which influence many numbers of people. And of course, in this case, we're talking about literally millions of Albertans, or at least hundreds of thousands of them, I'm certain. And so the class action will have to go through a particular phase called certification. And this is where the court decides whether or not this is a suitable case, it meets a particular test, it can go forward and be heard. The certification phase in the class action is really crucial because historically, almost invariably, if you get through the certification phase, you enter into settlement negotiations. They almost never go to trial. And so the most resistance that you tend to get in a class action is in the certification phase. So that takes on a bit of a different lifespan than a regular, let's call it a regular lawsuit, alleging public malfeasance or negligence or things of that nature. You can allege torts in the context of a class action. In fact, we are doing it in a class action that we have filed in the Federal Court of Canada on behalf of all unvaccinated Canadians who suffered harm as a result of the actions of the federal government, the prejudicial actions of the federal government, where they vilified unvaccinated Canadians mercilessly and are still doing it, actually. But you can also bring a lawsuit as an individual or on behalf of a smaller group of individuals that would not be a class action, and that lawsuit would follow sort of a different lifespan procedurally than a class action would.
Right. So that's the difference between the torts and the class actions. I know of a misfeasance tort out of
Mm-hmm.
Edmonton, I believe, that
Yeah,
against the military on behalf of 300 members.
that's
Now,
Catherine Christensen's case, I believe.
right.
Yeah.
Um, is there a different end accountability in that, like the class action is against the government,
Mm-hmm.
which
Mm-hmm.
ultimately at the end of the day means that if they lose, then my taxes are going to go up because the government doesn't make money, all it does is steal money to
True.
pay its bills.
Yeah.
So this is kind of hurt ourselves to hurt the enemy kind of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
that with the misfeasance torts, that's a little bit more towards the personal accountability. Am I wrong in I know it's probably very crude.
You're right. No, you're right. You can allege that public officials have a certain degree of immunity from lawsuits. However, where it is shown that they acted outside the scope of their duties, and where they acted really contrary to their duties as a public official, then they can be held, civilly and personally liable. I know that some of the cases, for example, that were filed against Alberta Health Services, named Verna Yu and Dr. Hinshaw personally, because they were directly involved in decisions which were prejudicial to healthcare workers, such as doctors and nurses. So there certainly is precedent for that. I don't believe that, and Jeff could speak better to this better than I can, but I don't believe that is what is being alleged in the Ingram class action. I think what is being alleged there is essentially that the government acted outside of its legal authority, caused harm and resulting damage and loss, and therefore the government is liable to all of those people who were impacted by lockdowns in the ways that are described and complained of in the suit. In the class action that we filed in federal court on behalf of the unvaccinated, we have two classes of plaintiffs. One is what we call the mobility class. So these are people who could not get on a plane, a train, or a ship anywhere in this country, couldn't leave the country. Effectively, many of them were essentially grounded or housebound. Oftentimes they couldn't work. And they suffered significant harm as a result of that. They couldn't attend weddings. They missed out on funerals, all types of things. So that's one class. The other class that's included in that class action are federally regulated workers, other than people who worked in the aviation industry, who suffered harm as a result of the Trudeau government imposing vaccine mandates on all federally regulated employers. Because that impacted more than 1 million workers in our country, and it impacted them in a whole number of different ways. So there are different ways to articulate these harms, but I think what we're seeing right now, Wayne, is just sort of the beginnings of this, and part of the reason for that is, and I know you'll appreciate this, and I think many of your viewers and listeners will too, is that Canadians have felt silence. We felt as though we've lost access to the halls of power. Our parliaments have not been sitting. Our legislatures have not been sitting. We had a man coming out of a cottage barking orders for over 1.5 years, growing a beard, shaving it off, cutting his hair, letting it grow. And we haven't had, our country has not operated in a way that it has historically. Brian Peckford talks a lot about this. And so in a lot of ways, Canadians have felt, I think, estranged from things like our justice system, our political system, our educational system, certainly our healthcare system. And so the job that I think that these cases are doing, these legal cases are doing, that I hope it will accomplish and have accomplished to some degree historically, is to offer access of sort of the rank and file everyday Canadian to power. That is, we can go, we can sign on to a class action suit, and we can have a say. We can let out a cry against the people who are exceeding their authority, who are committing government overreach, who are, let's say, committing public malfeasance against us. We don't seem to have access to this any other place than through the courts. And thank God we still have access to the courts. We don't like some of the decisions that are coming out, but thank God for people like Justice Mosley. So there is hope. And I think we are going to see more of this. And I think that it is going to, long term, over time, I think it is going to have a significant impact over what is happening politically in this country. Because what we see, for example, take the Canadian Parliament. Can you ever remember a time when Parliament has been more dysfunctional than it is now, right now, Wayne? I mean, we have one man who's elected in the riding of Burnaby, who controls the entire balance of power in our country. It's absurd. And so our parliaments are not working properly. Certainly our cabinet and prime minister, that relationship is not working properly. We have too much power vested in one single office. And we seem to have cabinet ministers who are nothing more than yes men and women and sycophants. They move in and out of portfolios after messing them up, and then they resign and take juicy jobs at big Bay Street law firms. It just seems to be an absolute freak show in Ottawa. And so I think the purpose that these lawsuits are serving is providing everyday Canadians with some access to power, because the political process seems to be rather dysfunctional, at least in terms of the national scene.
Well, you've set up an awful lot there again, and we live in you're 100% correct, and I'd like to elaborate on that. That Canadians felt unheard. We continually preached democracy from our government, about, while being provided no avenues for democracy. We have seen an infiltration and a capture of activism throughout our entire systems, our entire management systems, in every institution and organization in our country, at the behest of these individuals that basically play Ponzi games with the portfolios, and endeavor to uh, create more constructive uh, collusion and corruption amongst them. And we are no longer seen by the world as a serious country. We are the most
Sadly. Yeah.
serious country in the world. And I do a lot of speaking internationally, and it's hard to hear how much disrespect our leadership has earned Canadians around the world sometimes, where they don't look at us as anything different than what our representatives are, unfortunately. And they
Yeah.
have through their methodologies created this other, you know I was struggling to find the right words for it without being blatantly blunt about it. This
Hmm.
fascist system that has
Yeah.
corrupted our country through these public-private partnerships that allow for these institutions to be captured, because they're all corporations, and they're, as corporations, they're allowed to do certain things under the governance. So the governance tells them what they can and cannot do, and ultimately they become the control mechanisms. And this is sadly where Canada is at. The world sees it, knows it, is calling it out. We can't seem to identify it, that um, public-private partnerships are fascism by definition,
Right.
folks.
Yeah.
And every single municipality and province has been captured under this. And the our society only functions, only works under an agreed upon moral and ethical and law based system, which is what they have been manipulating us and gaslighting us, astroturfing us. We're crazy. We are the threat to democracy for demanding democracy.
Very right. And the word, if you think of the word fascism, of course, it goes back to the Italian politics about 100 years ago, when a man named Benito Mussolini, who was actually a pretty smart guy, postgraduate degree, and he coined this term, fascisti, and it means to bind. You think of the English word fasten, it means to bind together. Unfortunately, in political parlance, when you bind the media, social media, and big corporate, big government together, you get a big mess. You get tyranny, and you're exactly right. That's what we are living through right now. And speaking about this capture, just to back you up, Wayne, recently had a brilliant guest on my program. His name is Brandon Weichert. He's an author, but he's a geopolitical analyst, American, who's based follows very closely Washington D.C., and he consults closely with the American military. And Brandon, he publishes something called the Weichert Report that some of your listeners may want to check out. But Brandon told me, in talking to the American military, that what you just said is precisely their opinion. That essentially the Canadian government has been captured, and that it is being controlled not by the World Economic Forum, not by the UN Agenda 2030 or the EU, but essentially by China. That is the opinion that the higher ups in the U.S. military have of Canada.
Well, that's been a long process. We could spend hours digging into. That process started, and it's important for people to understand that, because that process started in the 90s with Trudeau Senior, the card-carrying communist,
Club
who
of Rome. Yeah.
Club of Rome, all of these things that started to manifest their public-private partnerships. We opened the door to China for all of these things, but I think what people don't necessarily understand, and this is where the disconnect comes, is these public-private partnerships embedded themselves into the capitalist
Right.
avenue, the infrastructure, manufacturing, but the policy to support that and enable and make that possible came from the United Nations World Economic Forum through these non-binding agreements that
Mhm.
all of our establishment parties have signed on the dotted line to. So unfortunately, this takes Mr. Polyev out of the equation for being an honest Canadian first Canadian as well, because his name is also on these agreements that facilitate this expansion of the public private partnerships on behalf of China. And so this is where the unholy alliance of the United Nations, World Economic Forum, WHO, IMF, all of these organizations seem to be the only bad guy in the room, but they inherently are not. And the key point of that is the entry point of this is at the municipal and provincial and corporate level.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
That is where it starts. Trudeau
Mm.
didn't do this. He only gave them the opening to do this. Trudeau,
Mhm.
and that started with Trudeau Senior. So when we go after these federal politicians saying get us out of the WHO, all they can do is tear up that agreement. It doesn't change a thing because the actual implementation, the relationship exists between the municipalities, the cities, and the provinces.
Yeah. No, you're quite right. And what you say is that although that entry point is that deep, um, the flip side of that is that's also where it can be most resisted. And this is why I think, and I don't know if you agree with this, Wayne, but I don't think I agree with you. I don't think we're going to be as effective in making change to this, sort of at the tops of the trees. I
Right.
think if we look at the roots, and if we can get people activated at the grassroots levels, get them involved in their library boards and serving on their school boards, and get them back involved in their communities. You know, the government that affects you the most is the one that's closest to your door, and it's also the one that you can influence the most if you get organized and do it and have something to say that's valuable and meaningful to yourself and your neighbors. And so it's true that you know, it's down deep at that level, but that's also the level where we have some power to resist it and change it. Because let's face it, you and I aren't going to have conversations with the prime minister, or perhaps, or probably not even Mr. Polyev. Perhaps you have. He hasn't been on my show yet, but you know, we can have conversations with our local school boards. We can have conversation with our counselors, with their MLAs, with our MPs. You know, these are things that we can do. We can get organized in our communities to affect change, and we're seeing some success with this throughout Canada. And You know, I think that's the ticket. That's the way that if we're going to renovate Canada, we're going to restore Canada to dignity around the world. It's got to start at home and in our local communities. That's my view.
I 100% agree with you. I'm shooting for a restoration of Canada, not a reset of Canada,
Yes,
and
me too.
and that's something that our community here will have heard me harping about for years now. Is that the intervention point? Our opportunity is at the local and municipal level. This
Mhm.
is how we affect change. The ideology all comes from up there, but it depends on the implementation of us. So this is how we restore Canada: is we take control back of our local government, the closest government to us, and we assemble not to rally and protest, but to organize how we replace the seats that will not do what are, they're representing us to do. And this is the great opportunity of 2024, in my opinion. 47% of the world's population is going through elections this year. That
Really?
means there is
Wow.
47% of the world's population that has the opportunity to ask every candidate seeking your approval, your endorsement. It needs to come down to one thing: Are you going to remove the public-private partnerships? Are you going to give up the strong mayors programs? And are you going to reject the globalist policies? Really simple. And if they don't say yes and are held accountable to that yes, they are not your candidate. And right now, I don't think that there are too many official candidates in any of the major parties that can answer yes to those questions.
Yeah. Well, just to make your point, as you know, Wayne, I posted out something this morning on my X page, which showed a whole list of municipalities in Alberta that had signed on to something called UNESCO, which is essentially, as you say, a public-private partnership between the Canadian government and the UN, which gets these towns, some of them having populations as small as 5,000 people, to sign on to the whole UN World Economic Forum agenda. And
Yep.
as bizarre as it is, some of the communities on that list are, really heavy oil and gas producing communities. And so, if getting to that grassroots level was not important for the globalists, why on earth would they be going to these town councils and getting them to sign on to these accords? They know how important it is to get to the municipal level. Stephen Jabot, just today, our erstwhile environment minister, is saying, he said today, he announced that the federal government is no longer going to contribute any money to build roads in municipalities. Well, why does he think that he has power to say that? Well, the federal government, as you know, has no constitutional authority over municipalities. That's provincial jurisdiction. But he seems to think that he has power over what happens in municipalities. And the answer is, the reason why is because the federal government has been building these relationships. Excuse me. That really usurp the power of municipalities, draw power to the federal government away from provinces. And I think this federal government really would like to obviate provinces and make them obsolete, and just have everything, all the orders simply come from Ottawa, and we're leading back to the Eye of Sauron, which is in Davos or wherever else these people, these globalists, have their situs of power, of evil. I think that's their vision of the world, that basically these
100%.
provinces are just a nuisance. They're just in the way. All these premiers should just basically shut up and go away, especially Danielle Smith.
You're far kinder about Mr. Jabot. When he first was appointed, his very first position, I posted an article then saying, "I see my hitman coming," and boy, has he taken his swings at me since then. And I do not. I address him as Canada's highest-ranking eco-terrorist,
Wow.
and that is, by his own actions, he has earned that
Hmm.
moniker from me.
You
But
sure has.
it's exactly that what you say there.
Yeah.
Geneva
He's,
and Davos and Brussels, those guys, those ideologues that would be completely unelectable in any society. No society would be ruled
mhm,
by them. They take their money and they hire the politicians and buy the corporations' favor, and they direct then through these meat muppets what the policy in the international rules based order that you in you know fa- you Enderby, Saskatchewan, are only allowed 4 chickens and 2 tomato plants because of climate. That's ultimately where it all comes down from. And these municipalities and all of these, all the way up, have been captured through exactly that process. Oh, you want funding for a new arena or a skate park or a road? Then you must implement these policies, these green incremental creeping policies on climate. Oh no, you cannot build there. There's a worm that lives there, and it's a special worm. It's the only place in the world that worm lives. So no, 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 no. You all have to move out of the town now.
yeah.
Uh, I hate to make it so so broad brush, blatantly sarcastic, but it's I can't help but see it any other way.
Yeah, I agree with you. What's encouraging though is we are seeing signs that people have had enough.
100%.
I saw a video the other day of a gentleman in Britain really giving it to his prime minister over what's happening with COVID, with vaccine related deaths. And of course, this is a story that governments and the medical establishment and big pharma has been suppressing for a long time. But in Canada, in every province, the major cause of death, number one cause of death right now, is unknown causes. Unknown causes looks like healthy 14-year-old boys and girls suddenly dropping dead on ice rinks, in gymnasiums, and on ball fields. This is a truth that cannot be spoken, or has not been spoken thus far, but it's starting to be spoken, and we're seeing that now happening in England. I saw a press conference the other day involving Governor Ron DeSantis and my friend Dr. Jay Bhattacharya and the Surgeon General for Florida, who has banned the vaccines there. And they were announcing that a grand jury is about to, excuse me, indict some people in that state who are involved in the whole purveying of the vaccines. And then in Slovakia, they've announced that there's been a regime change, and there's going to be a full-blown inquiry there into the way that the COVID-19 pandemic was handled by their government. So there are signs of change coming. Excuse me.
100%, and not just on the COVID. That seems to be where the cracks in the dam are starting to really leak some water on a global scale. You've got Slovakia going into a full-blown inquiry onto the measures. One of the fellows that was involved in that case in Florida, having the jabs banned there, Joseph Simone was on my program a couple of weeks ago. So you're 100% right. We're seeing a resistance. The jig is up, but it's on its way to being visible now that the jig is up, and this is really leads into what we're seeing on a global scale. In Europe, you mentioned a fellow giving it to his leader in the UK. This is what I've been seeing through these international panels that we've been doing, addressing all of these same symptoms that all of our countries are dealing with, and that is what we're seeing in Europe with the farmers there rising to resist. Those are not civil wars. And this is a point I really want to make. Everybody here is waiting for the Civil War. Everybody in the U.S. is waiting for the Civil War. There is no Civil War, but there is a united global civil resistance against the same oppressors. So we have to be aware that we are not individual nations or provinces in this mess, and to give up a little bit of the focus, the myopic focus that we're looking at here, and understand that after 150 years, it's going to take some time and some pain and some suffering to get out of this. But what we are seeing is a global realignment of ideas and what is right and wrong, morals, values, and the reality that is assembling to oppose this activism that has been capturing all of our nations simultaneously, and so the tide is definitely turning, and I think in some cases we have to be careful to watch how far it turns. It turns back the other way.
Right.
But for people to be inspired by that and to take actions where they can, we cannot live in fear. We cannot let the things like what happened in the first truckers convoy stop us from continuing to resist right now. But it doesn't have to be in that way. There is more effective means to resist and oppose, rather than just getting out and screaming and shouting 2 minutes of hate on a Saturday someday. And so reorganizing our energy towards that, the same things other countries are fighting, chances are it's the same mess here. And I think that's kind of one of the things. I'm going to kind of skip over a couple things real quick here. We're getting to the tail end of the time here. That's one of the things that the Tucker interview with Vladimir Putin, I think, really put into a global perspective for people.
It sure did. And I watched that, and like many who did, the many hundreds of millions of now who have watched it, You know, I was it was an eye-opening experience. It confirmed some of the things I thought about Vladimir Putin, but I have to say I came away with it learning a lot more about him. And my overall impression of him is he doesn't want to rule the world. What he wants to do is he wants to make Russia the greatest country in the world. And we seem to have the only world leader who's not interested in making his country great. Um, we really can't hold that against Mr. Putin. I certainly don't. But he doesn't seem to be very interested in, conquering the West and destroying us. He seems to be mostly concerned with what the Russians or the Soviets have been concerned about for a very long time, and that is protecting themselves from what they see as a hostile West. The great thing that Tucker Carlson is doing by traveling around the world and talking to people like Mr. Putin, and also, excuse me, Javier Milei, if you saw that interview, and Donald Trump and others, is he's showing the power of conversation. What we're doing right now, where we actually will sit together and talk and listen to each other, and ask questions and inquire and get to know each other. Communication. This is the best recipe for preventing or reducing or alleviating conflict is communication. And so I applaud Tucker Carlson for having the courage to do that, and to really expose the reality of who people like Vladimir Putin are. He's not an awful monster with horns and a pointy tail. He's a man leading a very important country. He's an important world leader. He has an encyclopedic knowledge of his own country. He loves his own country. He's interested in his own people. He's not an ideal man. He was part of the KGB, one of the heads of the KGB. He's probably killed people with his own hands. I don't know. But he's not a saint. But by the same token, he's not some awful villain. And so I think one of the great things where Tucker Carlson is being really a thought leader for the world is he's showing the value of conversation and being able, let's sit down. I may not agree with everything you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. Something like that. And one of the things that we've lost, certainly in my lifetime, and I expect you'll agree with this, Wayne, because like me, you're old enough to remember shows, where we would have people come on and debate. I believe Mr. Buckley used to have a program like that in the U.S. Would have all kinds of interesting guests, and sometimes they would get into, very, very serious acrimony. But then the show would end and everything would be fine and no one got killed. But what this illustrates is we need to have conversations, and we also need to have conversations where we risk giving offense to one another. We can still have a civil conversation where we disagree and perhaps offend each other, but we don't have to react emotionally. It doesn't have to become personal. We don't have to engage and descend into ad hominem attacks. We can defend our positions. We can be hard on the problem, but soft on the people. And so this is what I admire about people like Tucker Carlson, really everybody who's in the podcasting space, is, we're willing to have hard conversations. I wish that I could get more people who of a different political stripe or philosophical views on my program, but it's very hard to get people on the left to come onto a program. But they know they have really bad ideas.
If they do that, they give away their own power, because the only power that they have is to say, no, you're wrong. Sure. I disagree with you. You must be canceled.
And censorship. Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think that was no, I took away some different takeaways out of that interview, and Tucker has gone since had another interview. I think in Dubai. I'm not sure. Might have been Saudi Arabia. He's on the World Enemy Tour, which was equally profound. And some of the things that I think with a discussion like that with the Tucker had with President Putin is very nuanced. He's not going to just get on there and be a ranting, raving lunatic. He is not that kind of a man. And people really needed to understand that Russia is not an expansionist nation. Are you kidding? They've got the biggest country and the most languages and the most cultures and the most everything. They don't want any more headaches Poland has nothing to offer them. They don't want Germany. They want to be left alone to develop their country. And one of the things that I think that people need to understand is we grew up with this Russia bad, USSR bad. When the USSR collapsed, what came out of that since 1990 is a very different Russia. The Russia that
Yes.
we have now is not the KGB driven USSR.
Yeah.
They wanted to emulate and to grow and to build themselves so much under the capitalist, opportunity that it offers, and they
Mhm.
have become very much a European destination when you look around. And I've got so many friends over there, and I'm not selling Putin, but what I am identifying is the only freaking adult in the room.
Yep. Isn't it shocking? Think about it. Now, I might be mistaken, and I would invite your viewers to correct me on this. I don't think in the nearly 9 years that Justin Trudeau has been our prime minister, he's ever visited Russia to meet with Mr. Putin. That to me is truly astonishing. Mr. Biden, who has been president of the United States since January of 2021, to my knowledge, has never sat down with Mr. Putin. Now at this point, we know that they could not have a conversation about
It's not possible.
anything except maybe Francois Mitterrand, who's been dead since 1996. They probably both remember him. Mr. Biden certainly does. But but the point is, looking back to Ronald Reagan era, for example, or either of the Bush eras, they would get together and have conversations. Mr. Trump, and actually Mr. Putin talked about this. Mr. Trump had a very active ongoing relationship. Yeah, that's their job. So why isn't our leader of a G7 or G20 country, it seems we're dropping, like Canada, why isn't he talking with Mr. Putin? He's head of one of the largest countries with the largest country with one of the largest economies in the world. And we have a lot in common with the Russians. We share borders in terms of the Arctic. They're an oil and gas producer. There's all kinds of synergies. And the best way or I would say the worst way to avoid conflict with another nation is by never talking to them.
There's a couple of things I might be able to give you some context as to why some of those things might be, and a good portion of that has to do with its inherent ingrained genetic hatred between Russia and the Nazis. And right. Russia has absolutely no delusions or illusions about who or what Chrystia Freeland is. She has been banned from their country for a very long time. They know the truth, and this is the that escapes people is Putin has been the beloved leader of his country for 22 years, not under an iron thumb, not necessarily the most democratic, but as far as Russia goes, Russians have never had life so good as they have under Vladimir Putin, and they love and respect him for that. Those the majority. And this man has lived through every treasonous act and every failed treaty and every agreement that the West has given in the last 20 years. We screwed that up, and at this point, I think it's very clear for people to hear. And this is what he said: he doesn't hate the people, but why should he continue to be the bigger guy in the room, giving up and taking the beating for these corrupt individuals that are behaving as we've identified? And no matter which way you look, you can see a Nazi policy. Whether it's a Nazi behind every blade of grass or not, that's still up for debate. But these are things that make diplomacy incredibly difficult, and it's important for people to remember that, as you said, that is our northern neighbor, and we've got a chihuahua out of the closet pissing on a Russian bear dog, and that is just dumb.
Mm-hmm. And she was doing it again today, Chrystia Freeland. She was giggling and snickering about freezing bank accounts again as continuing sanctions against Russia. Seriously, what are we doing? Wasn't it bad enough that we had a Ukrainian Nazi given a standing ovation in our parliament. Do these people not understand what World War II was like for the Soviet Union? That country lost more lives in World War II than
26
all the
million.
other countries of in the world
Yep.
combined.
More than
Um,
double times what all of the other
yes, they
countries
suffered
combined.
so severely, and Stalin never forgave the West
No.
for sort of leaving them out to dry to basically fight the Nazis on their own
Yep.
on the Eastern Front. And folks, they defeated the Nazis. That's the truth. The Americans will tell you they won the war. The it was the Soviets fought them. If you want to learn a lot about World War II, look at what happened on the Eastern Front. Those stories are not told. Some of those tank battles, the Battle of Stalingrad. So, I mean, the Russians understand that there weren't any Ukrainians fighting Nazis in World War II. That's not true. That didn't happen. But for Vladimir Putin to be in an interview with Tucker Carlson and reference an
Yes.
incident that offended the Russian people is ghastly. It's a blight upon our entire country. It's awful that we've offended the Russian people in doing
We
that.
should be equally as offended. And it's come out that I knew it was no accident. This was in their own deceptive, inverted, twisted way. This was an intentional virtue signal in support of Zelensky's power base
Yes,
in the Ukraine, which, make no mistake, Canada has been funding and training Nazi battalions in the Ukraine for more than a decade. And our legacy media used to actually report on that. I did actually find reports as late as 2019 where the National Post was going, "What are we doing here?"
really,
Yeah,
really. Oh,
yeah. So this is not even theory. This is but Canadians either don't care or don't know, or they know and just don't care. It's to me, it's incredibly shameful. I can never, think about my own country the same way again, knowing that we're
hmm,
allowing this.
yes,
Allowing it makes us accomplice to it. But
hmm,
this is
hmm,
a long ways from over, and these are when you listen to the nuances and the discussions, Putin knows it, and this is not going to be an easy thing for him to forgive our governments for. Although he holds no ill will to the people, I think that we should be incredibly grateful because he could make us a mud pit in a heartbeat if he chose to.
yeah, that's for certain. We're a very small player, in the world. I mean, and actually, let's face it. I mean, Canada exists at the pleasure of the United States, and
We're the
this
tag
is
along
something.
token little brother.
Yes, and all kidding aside, what's going to be very interesting, looking sort of at the presidential election that's upcoming in November, um, is if Mr. Trump is obviously going to be the GOP candidate. If he wins, what is he to make of a Canadian government, the Trudeau and company, who are so frightened by the prospect of a Trump presidency that they're going and they're having secret but closed door meetings about what to do about a Trump presidency? And what you talked about, how Canada's sort of reputation on the world stage has suffered harm. I think it's deeper than that. I think that someone like Donald Trump is looking at Canada and is saying, well, in the past, this has been a very convenient arrangement. They've had a pretty stable political environment, in some ways more stable than the United States. But now we don't have that. We have the opposite of that. We have a deeply unstable political climate. We have essentially a globalist client state operating just outside of the United States. We have the longest undefended border in the world. And what's going to be very interesting is to what extent the Americans are going to tolerate this. On this continent right now, we know the Chinese are setting up military installations in Cuba. We hear that the Russians might be doing that too. What about Canada? Is the United States going to exercise more control over domestic politics in Canada out of necessity, in order to stabilize what's going on here? Because the way that our government is being handled, especially with proof of the infiltration of the Chinese, is the United States going to be keeping a much more watchful eye over Canada? And is that the reason why people like Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson are coming here? Is Canada going to see a visit by Donald Trump in the lead up to the November election? Wouldn't that be something? I wouldn't be surprised to see that. I would not be surprised to see that.
I've spent many hours in discussions on American programs and outlining to them the reality of what's going on up here, because they're as blind to it as we are for the most part. They don't have the luxury of us invading all of their media platforms and spaces, so they typically only see what our legacy media pumps out there unless we get in their grills for it or something significant happens.
Right.
But there's a growing number of people that I talk to down there that are realizing that the existential threat to America might not even be the southern border and the invasion there. It might be what's developing across the northern undefended border that nobody is watching for.
Absolutely.
And that should frighten Canadians, because not every American looks at us like we're brother or cousin. They really don't give two hoots about eliminating any existential threat. They see no different. You're not American. If you're a threat to America, you got to go. And that's something that we should have a legitimate concern over, as you know. That's an undefended border, and it means a lot to them, but we should be more afraid of that than what they are.
Right? And I think that some of the people who are very worried are Mr. Trudeau and his cabinet, because Donald Trump and company could tear their little playhouse down.
Well, if we do our jobs correctly, those RICO statutes and laws will impact some of those guys at some point too, as this corruption Tower of Babel comes crashing down in Canada. We've gone way longer than I usually keep a guest late.
Sorry.
I'm grateful. Thank you. Usually I try
I've enjoyed the conversation so much. I just kept going. So
likewise. But I want to, this is going to kind of me. I don't think it will, but to some it might put them on the spot. Last question I wanna, and then I'll let you go out of this.
Sure.
Trudeau said once upon a time, Canadians have no core identity. Leighton, what does it mean to you to be a Canadian?
I think that first of all, we're a country that was formed and informed by our traditions, our traditions that come from Great Britain, and also from the French, and also from the indigenous peoples, and also by all of the other people who have come and been part of this country. We are a multi-ethnic society. We are the most welcoming country in the world. But multiculturalism is a disease that was introduced into this country by the Pierre Trudeau Liberals and has been perfected by the globalists as a psyop and as an idea pathogen, and it's destroying our country. Multiculturalism is. We cannot live sort of divided under the same roof. A house that divided cannot stand. And if we are going to restore Canada, make Canada great again, which I think it should be the project of everyone who lives here and cares about this country, whether you've been here for generations or whether you just arrived. If we're going to make Canada great again, I think that Canada's best days are ahead of us. I think we have to restore the supremacy of God and the rule of law in this country. I think that we have to fall in love with our country again. We have to get involved in our communities. We have to take an interest in our children's education. We have to restore the dignity of our universities. We have to take an interest in our neighbors, in their healthcare and the way they live. But we also need to loosen the chains of unbridled government. This is something that, in my view, is very un-Canadian. We're a country that it was formed under principles of liberty, going all the way back to the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights, which, by the way, are still both parts of our Canadian small c constitution. And I think that we have to recognize that actually we live in a great country. We are part of a great society. We have a great responsibility to restore it. It's a huge job. But it starts with, I think, caring about your neighbors, understanding that we all have something very, very valuable, worthwhile, and unique to give to our country. You don't have to be, a trial lawyer. You don't have to be a famous podcaster. You don't have to be, a prime minister. We all can make a difference. We all can be. And this maybe sounds to some people like tripe, but I come back to something that Preston Manning said in a book that he wrote called "Do Something," where he set out 365 different things that you can do every day in your community that make a difference in your life and the lives of others. And that's Canada in a nutshell. That's what Canada means to me. That's what kind of country I grew up in. And I agree with Lord Conrad Black and his book when he laid out the Canadian Manifesto. And he said that actually, if properly governed, Canada has the ability to be in its future, and it's foreseeable. It's within reach. It's within our grasp to be a world superpower.
100%.
But we have to want it. We have to want that for ourselves. We have to want it for our children, for our grandchildren. But it starts with you and me, and it starts with restoring dignity to our country. The word rehabilitate actually means to restore again to dignity, and that's what we need to do with this country. That's the job of every Canadian who cares about our country, who cares about what happens here, who cares about our worldwide reputation, and also cares about what happens right outside our front doors and in our communities.
Well, I agree with you so much on so many of those things, and there's so many so many things that I wanted to get into with you here tonight that we didn't even touch. There with the parental rights bill in Alberta, the MAID programs, all of these things are fights and discussions we shouldn't even be having. But since we have to, I think that these are the things that we can serve the people the best with being brave enough to have these conversations out there. So I'm gonna lie. I'm gonna pop up a question here, just because this is something that is you might be able to throw a little light on that. Does this open the door for those folks too with the
You
action
want to ask
lawsuit?
about two people who donated to the truckers with respect to the class action lawsuit? I don't want to cop out here, but I'm not as familiar with
All right,
that
fair enough.
particular lawsuit as I have some others. So I don't like to comment, because if I speak out of school and somebody acts upon my advice, then I've done
Totally,
somebody a disservice.
totally respect that. They're just that just means I'm going to have to get somebody that has
Well,
more
I'm
answers for different
one
questions.
thing I can show you I'm going to be doing when I get off of this call is I'm going to be looking up that lawsuit so I can learn more about it, because I want to know what's going on, and that's one I haven't gotten to yet, because it's sort of focused on what's happening in Ontario, and I tend to focus more on what's happening with my own cases and what's happening in Western Canada nationally. So
Well, thank you so much for an amazing conversation. So much information, knowledge, and learning, Leighton. I hope we could get a chance to do this again real soon.
yeah.
Guys, I've dropped Leighton's Twitter hand in the chats on the respective platforms. Please go and give him a follow. And in the show notes, you'll find a link to Leighton's Linktree account, which has all of his where to go information and stuff. So once again, Leighton, thank you so much for finding the time to come and hang out with us
Oh,
and answer
it's
some.
been my honor to be here with you, Wayne. I was looking forward to talking with you on your show, and it's lived up to all of my best expectations. I'd be quite pleased to come back again and talk with you, and hopefully provide some meaningful content for your viewers and listeners.
Anytime, and anytime you've got some big news, just give me a shout out and we'll make it happen again. So
All right, thank you, sir.
fantastic. Bye for now. All right, guys. That was a lot of fun. I can't deny I was very much looking forward to having this conversation. I could have got into so much more. So I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did, and we will see about getting him back again real soon. So thank you all for hanging out with us tonight. Stay free, stay strong, and we will see you on Thursday with some more amazing discussions and some stories I can almost guarantee you haven't heard anywhere else yet. So stay Canadian, stay strong. I love you all, guys. Bye for now.